record. Awesome, thank you. Well, Dr. Debnam, it's great to have you here today, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to make yourself available to us. You know, I've known you for many years now because I've been, you know, I went through your master beekeeping classes and then most of your commercial beekeeping classes, and I just have thoroughly enjoyed the material that you've taught as well as your style. So I thank you for what you've done for me personally as a beekeeper. So Scotty, you know, you got your PhD there at the University of Montana about 2022, if I remember right.
Yes, sir.
And Jerry Bromenshank told me one time, he said, I just had this long-haired guy hanging around my department and wanted a job. And he said, I gave him a job. And he said he ended up being something pretty special.
That is pretty much the origin story.
Yeah.
Now, the real origin story is he hired me because he needed someone to pick up heavy stuff. He'll tell you that too.
Yeah, that's right. He said you are a bodybuilder, and so he said that came in handy. But I'll kind of turn things over to you, Scott. Let you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and what brings you here today, and then also I think you're going to take a minute and talk about the University of Montana's programs for beekeepers.
Yes, sir.
With that, I'll let you take it.
Thank you so much. I love speaking to WAS for two reasons. One, very big organization with a long history. And two, it's a Western Apicultural Society, so y'all are feeling my pain. For example, I gave a presentation last night to people in Southern California, and they were like, it's 75 degrees here. Come on. But that's paradise for beekeeping, right? But y'all feel my pain. You know, it's 23 degrees was the high today in Missoula, Montana. It's 10 degrees right now. So I love speaking to y'all are my people. I got my PhD from the University of Montana, and I studied honeybee brood temperature regulation. I really enjoyed all the work I did with that, and I enjoy how the bees manipulate the temperature inside the hive. So that's what led me to looking into how temperature behaves over winter, and I realized very quickly that the bees have created a perfect situation to survive the winter. And we're going to look at that perfect situation once we start getting into the talk. But first, let me share a screen with y'all, and we'll get this thing started. And we'll first talk about the programs the UM offers, and one more little program that I've recently started for some online mentorship, if y'all are interested in that. So let me share a screen here and pull up. There we go. All right, first off, I am an instructor for the University of Montana Master Beekeeping Program. The program currently sits at 7 courses. You don't have to take them all. You can take as many or as few as you like. You have to take the apprentice course as a prerequisite for every other course after that. One other course requires the journeyman course also. So you can get the traditional master beekeeper certificate, you know, apprentice, journeyman, master, and you can be a master beekeeper from the University of Montana. If you do attain the master beekeeping title, you will be listed in University of Montana's database, so you can prove it to anyone who asks you to speak, or if you want to speak somewhere, you can say, I'm a master beekeeper, log on to this site, and it certifies that you are a master beekeeper. But you don't have to. You can stop and take as many courses as you want. And we also teach kind of tangential to the traditional apprentice, journeyman, and master. We teach a natural beekeeping course. So if you're interested in keeping bees in a way that more closely reflects how naturally nesting bees behave, we offer that course. And no, it's not a put them in your backyard and ignore them. And so I teach you how to be a responsible beekeeper while honoring, you know, bee ecology and bee biology. And then we just finished the commercial beekeeping program. It is 3 courses. It is a queen rearing and package production course. It is a hive products course. Currently, we're calling it honey production, but we cover other products as well. We cover in great detail how to grade your honey, how to manage your crop, how to collect your crop, how to increase your crop. But we also cover things such as pollen production. You know, you can sell pollen to Canada. They'll buy it from you. And so we teach how to collect pollen, when to collect pollen, and how to make a profit out of that. So maybe we're presenting alternative profit potential in your operation. And then finally, we teach the commercial pollination course, and it teaches you, as the name says, how to pollinate. But we also in that course cover things like how to get the insurance for your operation as your operation grows, how you can get farmers grants, because believe it or not, you can get grants. Bees are covered under the farm grants and farm loans, and we teach you how to get those, or we point you in the right direction of how to get started in getting those types of loans. So it's a complete course to get you ready. If you're ready, if you started with 5 colonies, and next thing you know you have 25 colonies. If you're ready to step up and see what kind of profits you can make from these colonies, the commercial beekeeping course is the way to go for that. And you can get a commercial beekeeping certificate if you take the apprentice course, the journeyman course, and then the 3 commercial courses that are offered. That will qualify you for a commercial beekeeping certificate. Also, you'll be listed in a database so you can prove to your employees, to future employers that, hey, I got a commercial beekeeping certificate, so maybe I'm of value to your operation. Or if you simply want to manage your own company, it's there for that reason also. But to that end, many of our students ask, can we get access to your course videos and course lectures after the courses have closed? And the University of Montana has said no, because their rationale is when the semester is over, you don't have access to that professor anymore. So their rationale, and our videos are like filmed lectures, so that's their rationale. So I have started what we are calling the Beekeepers Academy. It's an online mentorship program. We will host a selection of the UM courses videos. So if you've taken our courses, you like our course, you would like to review some of those videos, some of those videos will be found in the Beekeepers Academy. But we will also continue the education that we started at UM. This is not under UM's umbrella, but we work very closely with UM. So this is the next step. If you've taken every one of our courses, the Beekeepers Academy is the next step to keep on having exposure to the education that UM provides, or having exposure to the level of education that UM provides. And it will launch in February, so keep an eye out for that. And with that, I believe I'll move on to what we're all here for, which is learn about what honeybee colonies do in the winter. Okay, now this talk is going to be lecture style. I'm a university professor, so I love using the chalkboard or the dry erase marker board. We don't have one here, right? But there is a digital whiteboard. And at the end of this lecture, we will go to the digital whiteboard. And I'm going to try to put all the things that I told you together and draw it out on the whiteboard and try to make it make a bit more sense. And then at the end, we will, you can ask me any question you want about bees. It doesn't have to be about overwintering. Anything you want to know about honeybees, I'll be glad to talk about it. I love talking about bees. They are my passion without a doubt. Okay, so let's talk about how bees survive the winter naturally. So most of this talk is going to be about how naturally nesting bees survive the winter. And I never use the term feral or wild or domesticated, because a honeybee is not domesticated. The first tenet of domestication is that organism, whether it is, be it a cow, be it corn, cannot survive without man's help. And the honeybee simply can survive without our help. So I don't like using the word domesticated or feral. I like using the words managed and naturally nesting. Because even our managed bees, the door is wide open. They can leave whenever they want. Some of them do. So that's why I'm using the terminology that I am using. But I won't begrudge you if you want to say domesticated after this lecture. That's totally fine with me. Okay, let's talk about what happens. First of all, we need to all understand that the colony closely controls their temperature all year round, not just in the wintertime. They closely control their temperature all year round. But they can let that temperature drop during the wintertime to somewhere around 70 degrees on average. So the heart of the cluster is going to be around 70 degrees. The mantle of the cluster is going to be around 50 to 55 degrees. All these temperatures are in Fahrenheit. I'll try to remember and speak in Fahrenheit, but when the scientist is trained, not to use Fahrenheit. So every now and then I may throw in the Celsius there, so I apologize for that. Okay, and this graph simply shows the honeybee colony's ability to control their temperature. These black dots you hear, that is the temperature of an empty hive. So the hive is just a box sitting out in the sun right next to all the other hives in this research. The green ones are the colonies that survived. The red ones are the colonies that died. And the x-axis is the month and year. So we go from early summer to early spring. So winter is in there, and that's when you see these temperatures drop. Temperatures drop when their brood nest gets smaller, because the brood have a very high temperature requirement. That's why the average temperature in the brood nest is 34.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So they got to keep that elevated temperature all year round. So that means that on a warm, sunny, 75-degree day in the spring, they actually have to heat the brood. So they're working to make it hotter inside the brood nest than it is outside. But this graph simply shows the colony's ability to control the temperature. The green line, as winter came and they lost their brood, they didn't have to be as hot. So they got down to around 15 degrees. This is in Celsius, unfortunately, which is around 55 degrees, 50 to 55 degrees. Then when the brood came back, notice this green line shoots right back up. So the brood came back, big brood patch. They started making their babies, getting ready for spring. Temperature shoots up. Now remember, the red lines are the colonies that did not survive. So they were dying, and bam, right here they all died, because the temperature matches directly with the empty hive box. So this shows how well they can control the internal environment of their hive. And that's good, right? And we need them to be able to do that. And we rely on them to be able to do that. Now, how do they do that? So let's say we got a bee, and then she gets cold. What is she going to do? She is going to do something called thermogenesis, which is thermo means heat, genesis means beginning. So the beginning of heat, right? So she's going to fire her muscles in her thorax, so muscle contractions. She's going to fire muscles in her thorax, and that produces heat. If you go for a run, you get hot. That's because your muscles are producing heat. So that they take advantage of that very same thing. So the thorax of the honeybee is packed full of muscle. Huge muscles for flight and for walking around. So, if you ever stop to think about it, the thorax of the honeybee is 100% dedicated to movement, either walking or flying. So the legs connect to the thorax and the wings connect to the thorax. So there's lots of muscle in there. It's dense. It's the densest muscular part of the honeybee. And what she does, she has two huge sets of flight muscles. If she fires them one asynchronously, which means fire one, then fire the other, fire one, then fire the other, fire one, then fire the other, her wings will move and flap, and then she can fly away. However, if she fires those muscles synchronously, that means group A and group B at the same time, she will produce heat, but her wings will not move. And that's how she is able to produce heat to heat herself or her colony. So she gets cold. Thermogenesis via muscle contractions of her flight muscles. Bam, that makes heat. That makes her happy. However, that is fueled by something called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate, the energy for ATP is created when cellular actions break down sugar. So to make ATP, you got to break down a carbohydrate. That gives you an extra energy molecule that you can then use for ATP. And ATP is the only fuel cells can use. That includes muscle cells. So where do you think inside a hive in the middle of the winter they're going to find carbohydrates to produce ATP to fuel the flight muscles to produce heat? Obviously, we all know it comes from the honey. So I love telling people that don't keep bees, honeybees don't make honey for your tea. Honeybees make honey so they can survive the winter. And so that's the direct link between muscle contractions and honey. They need it to fuel ATP, which is the only fuel that cells can use. So we all know this, we're beekeepers. Honey is extremely important. Now, while heat is not the only thing that is produced when they do these muscle contractions. They also produce, heat and water and CO2. Because remember when COVID was struck and we all had to wear our masks and those masks got wet as we exhaled? Because when we exhale water, we lose water. We don't lose water when we inhale. We lose water when we exhale. And all living things lose water when they exhale, including honeybees. And so that's why they create water when they're doing this thermogenesis. They create CO2 because they're exhaling. And they create heat because that was the point. Okay, so those are the three things that are inside the hive all winter long. And I'm going to do my very best to convince you that they don't just want all three of those things inside their hive. They need all three of those things inside their hive. Okay. Let's go with water. Okay. Just like the slide says, 1 gram of honey consumed produces 0.68 grams of water. Which don't sound like much, right? 0.68 grams of water, what is that? That's a teaspoon of a teaspoon of a teaspoon, right? But an overwintering colony, depending on how big it is, can produce up to 3 or 5 grams of water an hour. That doesn't sound like much either. That can be 1 liter a month. So keep that in mind. This is just the act of respiration. Release the water from the honey, and they transpire, which releases water, which they got in from the air, they got from the honey, they respire, they release that water. Up to 1 liter a month. Depending on the size of the colony, it could be more. And you're thinking, well, I don't know what you're thinking, but I thought to myself, how come I don't see just liters of water pouring out of my hive all winter long? It's because honeybees love water. You want to know what the most, You want to know what the most important nutrient is for the honeybee? It ain't protein, it ain't sugar, it's water. Every animal we have studied on planet Earth, that includes us and honeybees, the most vital nutrient is water. Everything that we've studied can live longer without food than it can without water. So water is the most important nutrient. And so this liter of water, they are consuming because they need it. Because how else are they going to get it? They've stored everything else they need inside that colony, but they haven't stored water because they make it and then they can drink it themselves. Dr. Seeley found way back in the 1990s that, and when he was quantifying the waggle dance to see, he was decoding it, he was studying how often they do it, he found that they do the most waggle dances for water, even more than for nectar, in the early spring when they're just warm enough for them to go flying. The first thing they want is water. So they need that water. All right, now let's talk about CO2, okay? Remember, because they exhale, just like me and you, we exhale CO2, they exhale CO2. Have you ever stopped to consider, does anybody know how when you instrumentally inseminate a queen, you have to knock her unconscious? Do you know how we knock her unconscious? We expose her to a slight CO2 airflow, and it makes her fall asleep. It doesn't knock her out, because it's not like surgery. We don't have to but we have to calm her down. And CO2 calms her down. Now, when she calms down, she quits moving so much. When she quits moving so much, then you can insert the sperm into her vaginal canal, and everything goes way smoother. If you didn't anesthetize her, she keeps squirming, she keeps working, she keeps fidgeting, and the more you squirm, the more you fidget, the more you move, the more energy you use, the more food you need. Okay? So if you're in a sealed cavity and you're filling it with CO2, and bees have a high tolerance for CO2, they can survive up to 8% CO2 in the air. That may sound like nothing, right? 8%, what is that? That's not even 10%. But 5% would kill us. So they can survive high levels of CO2. Many ground nesting and cavity nesting animals can. Because, that's a good adaptation. If you live in a sealed cavity, you're making CO2, that CO2 can't escape. You better learn or you better adapt to where you can live in a high CO2 environment. So the high CO2 environment they can live in, but it has a calming effect on them. So remember what we said, if you're calm, you're not working hard. If you're not working hard, you're not eating much. So even the CO2, this is the weakest, as far as empirical evidence goes, this is the weakest part of my talk. There's been very little research into, does the buildup of CO2 calm the bees down, thus helping them survive longer? Most of the CO2 work done on honeybee colonies has looked at its impact on varroa mites. because varroa mites cannot survive the high CO2 levels like honeybees can. So we have found that the overwintering sheds, if you allow the CO2 to build up just a little bit, up to around 5%. Well, I think it's 3%. Anyway, you let the CO2 build up, you can kill the varroa mites. But you got to be careful. You can't just walk in there. You got to flush that CO2 out before you can walk in there. But so I have to admit here, this is the weakest, scientifically speaking, this is the weakest part of my talk. So if you have a lot of questions about CO2, I don't know that I'll be able to help you, but I'll do my very best. But we do know, I'm just implying from what we do know, that CO2 calms these insects down, and that when you're calm, you're not overly active. When you're not overly active, you're not eating as much. So perhaps CO2 also is very important to them. But we have shown that high CO2 level definitely reduces their varroa mite levels. So we've discussed two of the three things that honeybee colonies produce, and I hope I've convinced you that both of those things are necessary. Water, most important nutrient, happens to be inside the hive. That's good. CO2. Even if I haven't convinced you that it calms them down, which means they eat less, hopefully I've convinced you that if nothing else, it reduces the varroa levels. And the final thing we already know about is they produce heat. And the purpose for this heat is obvious. It's cold outside. They can't survive when it's super cold, so they got to produce heat. So what they will do is they will cluster together. We all know this. And then they will heat themselves to, on average, around 70 degrees. The inside of the cluster is around 70. The outside mantle is around 50 to 55. And, you know, if it gets really cold, they can contract to reduce heat loss. If it starts to warm up, they can expand to allow some of the heat to escape, and they don't have to work so hard. So those are the three things they need. And those are three things they adapted to producing to survive the winter. Very few animals survive the winter using the strategy that honeybees use, for lots of reasons. One, if you're going to sequester large amounts of food to survive the winter as a fully viable, active colony, you're going to need a cavity that can hold it. You're going to need to build an infrastructure that can store it. You're going to have to collect it, and you're going to have to protect it. And very few animals can check off all of those boxes. So most insects overwinter as a single individual in a torpor phase. But honeybees, they do this amazing thing that we were discussing tonight. They build a cavity, and I'm going to show you in the next part of the talk how the cavity that they select is even perfect for this. But once they have that perfect cavity, they produce the three things that they need to survive the winter. Well, they've already produced one of them. Okay, so let's talk about some terms we need to know. First, let's talk about, I'm going to use words like thermal mass and R value. Thermal mass is just an item's ability to absorb heat and release it later. In R value, the R in R value just means resistance, which is the strength of a thing, whatever that thing is, ability to resist temperature change. So insulation allows you to resist temperature change. Thermal mass allows you to store heat and use it later. Okay? I'm going to use those terms as we discuss the perfect cavity that honeybees have built. Okay, now, this is the end of the talk, right? Once we're done with the chalkboard, then we will break into questions and answers and we'll have a good time. Okay, but for the chalkboard, I'm going to have to load up a digital chalkboard. So I'm going to stop share with y'all, load up my chalkboard, I'm going to share the chalkboard with you, and then we'll continue to talk. So give me just a second. Talk amongst yourselves.
We muted everybody.
Yeah, I know.
So
I'm saying that because I know they can't talk amongst themselves. And for this one, I'm going to have to put on my glasses too. All right, chalkboard is loading, so just bear with me. I gave that presentation to those Southern California people. I can clear that board. All right, I'm erasing the board. We're almost there. Okay, now let's share. We'll go at it again. If I went too fast, don't y'all worry. We'll have plenty of time to answer questions, and I will stay with y'all until y'all get tired of listening to me. Okay, so now y'all are staring at a white screen with a little digital dry eraser going around. So now let's have a look at how naturalistic colonies perfectly select and design their cavity. Okay, so naturalistic colonies will live in a tree. So let's draw us a little tree or big tree. And in that little tree, they find the tree that has a cavity. That's just a hole in the middle of it. Okay? And they want that cavity to be about, on average, 40 liters in volume. Okay, so what does that mean, right? What is 40 liters? Fortunately, I have an easy way to tell you what 40 liters is. 40 liter volume cube is about the size of a single hive body. Technically, a single hive body is 42 liters, but that's close enough, right? So now we know. They're looking for a cavity that's the size of a single hive body. And when I started reading this body of research, that's the very first thing that amazed me the most. Because I was taught beekeeping, make your colony as big as possible. When I read that these naturalistic colonies are surviving in a single story hive all year round, I was flabbergasted. And that is the biggest difference between naturalistic colonies and managed colonies. Now, I don't want you all to rush home and knock off the top hive body of your hives. We grow them like we do because we want products from them. So keep that in mind. Everything we do, every decision we make after we hear this lecture, when we take all this ecology and biology back to our actual hives and colonies, we need to make sure we're making those decisions based on our goals and values. And we can talk more about that in the question and answer part. So they try to find a tree with a hole in it that's 40 liters the size of a single hive body. Okay, let's say, and they send out their scouts, and the scouts will measure the internal volume. They'll fly across, they'll walk across, they'll fly up, they'll walk across, they'll walk down. They literally are measuring it. It's amazing. Then they'll fly back and say, hey, I found a great place to live. Come look. Okay, so let's say they found this cavity, right? And it had, it's got a 40 liter hole in it, so it's got a few cracks, right? The next thing they will do, or the second most important thing they look for, is a bottom entrance. They do not want they want a single bottom entrance. So they will go so far as to seal all the others up with propolis. They will seal every other entrance with propolis, leaving only a single bottom entrance. So that's the second thing that's most important to naturalistic colonies. And all of these things that I'm teaching you that they select for is important for making a perfect home to survive the winter. Okay, so 40 liters. We know why it has to be that big. Man, that's a huge requirement for a tiny little insect. We know it has to be that big because they got to store honey to survive the winter. They want a single entrance. We'll talk more about that single entrance later. Okay, so they're in a tree, which is great, right? Now, on average, they don't care. They're not real selective. If you just take a survey of all the trees used worldwide, no tree rises to the top. So bees don't show a preference for a tree type. They don't care. Other things are more important. So they'll live in any type of tree. But what happens on average is totally surrounding them on the sides is 4 inches of wood. Okay? So they have 4 inches of wood. Now the average tree, depending on the type of wood, provides an R value, there's our first R value, of between 1 and 1.5. Okay, so that means if you have 4 inches on either side of you, and you have R value, let's say R value 0.1 is easier to do the math. If your tree is providing an R value of 1 per square inch, you end up with an R value of 4. Anyone want to guess what the R value of a Langstroth hive is? Well, y'all are on mute, so you can't. I'll just tell you, it's 0.7. Not per inch, that's its total R value. So already our naturalistic colonies are living in a much better insulated cavity than the general Langstroth hive. All right. So now we know the R value, and I'll back us up. Oops, I'll leave our R value up. So we know the size they're looking for. We know they want 40 liter cavity. They want one single lower entrance, and they don't have any way of judging this, but just by nature of their selective homes, they get an R value of around 4. It's higher if it's a different type of oak tree versus a pine tree, for example. Now, I can't even begin to guess the R value that is above or below this thing, because there's an entire tree below it, because they like to live about 15 to 40 feet off the ground. Yeah, so there's an entire tree below it with a huge R value, and there's an entire tree above it with an incalculable R value. And that's going to be very important in the future and later on in this talk. So their sides have an R value of around 4. The top and bottom, off the charts. Totally insulated top and bottom. Okay. And then, as we all know, let's erase what's inside because we're going to fill this with wax and honey. We all know they will draw out comb. Let's make a purple comb. We know they put their babies in the middle because they have a high heat requirement. And they may be in another baby frame. Well, I guess it's comb, it's not a frame. And then, they'll start storing their honey. I ran out of room, but 3 or 4 different honey frames if they can fit it in there, right? I put one here too. All right, now notice the honey is on the outside. That's because honey has is a good insulator, and it has some thermal mass. That means it can absorb the heat and then give it back, release it later. Now the tree also has thermal mass, but at some point the tree's thermal mass becomes a bad thing. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Okay, so now we have our tree. We know the requirements of the cavity they choose. We know that they design their nest in a specific way, and that specific way is also designed to be beneficial for overwinter survival. Then what happens? Winter hits, they all cluster in the middle, and they do the thermogenesis that we talked about in the beginning of the talk. They produce heat. Now heat radiates in any direction it can. It just radiates off of that thing. And eventually, it hits the insulated wall and can't go any further. Then it bounces back. Hits the honey, heats the honey. When the honey stores all the heat it can store, their heat starts bouncing back. So eventually, they are living in a heat envelope, except for the bottom, right? Cold air comes in through here and pools down here. But that's fine, because here's the fun. Cold air is heavier than warm air. And that has something to do with thermal siphoning. And there's very little thermal siphoning in here because there's not enough space. But what happens is this lighter cold air it's more dense than the hot air, and so gravity pulls it down. So it doesn't rise. So no big deal. Not only that, but the dew point, that's the point at which hot air lets go of its water. The dew point is going to occur where the hot air and the cold air meet. So this is the point at which water, our enemy, right, is going to drip off. But notice this dripping off under the cluster. And that is beautifully designed, isn't it? Now, again, to go back to Dr. Seeley's work, Dr. Seeley, who looked at natural nesting colonies in the late 70s, early 80s, he found, and this really blew my mind, he found that, and this is a believe it or not situation, right? Some of his colonies that he found in naturally nesting trees had hollowed out the bottom and filled it with propolis. And he thinks, though he's been unable to test it directly, he thinks that is a pool to store water because they need it. Now, not every colony did this. Not every tree cavity he opened had this, but there was enough that he is suspicious that they made that to store water. So that is the perfect environment to survive the winter. So they're safe inside this box. They've stuffed it full of food. They are producing heat, water, and CO2. If a naturally nesting colony can survive the first year, they got an 80% chance of surviving every year after that. Do you know what kills, the number one killer of a naturally nesting colony is? After the first year, the tree dies. Because think about it, this poor tree's got a 40-liter cavity in it. There's something wrong with this tree. So the tree dies, thus exposing them, and they either have to abscond to a new nest if it's summertime, or if the tree blows over in a blizzard, they are dead. Now, Remember I said if they can survive the first year. The biggest hurdle of naturally nesting bees is surviving the first year, and that's because they have to invest in making the wax and storing the honey that first year, and wax is very expensive. Okay, so that's a look at what's happening naturally. So, and I love to teach my students biology and ecology and let them decide how it fits their goals and values. So I've just given you a whole bunch of biology and ecology. But now let's look at what happens when we try to help them. Because sometimes we are their worst enemy. Okay, so we got them overwintering in a 2-story cavity. It's already twice as big as they would like for it to be. I don't know if that's so bad because we've also encouraged the colony to get twice as large as they would let it be. And we encourage the colony to store twice as much honey as we would let them do it, as they would normally do it. So I don't know that that is that big a deal, but in my in my natural beekeeping course, I do teach you how to keep bees in a 1-story hive. Okay, so we put them in a cavity that is around 80 liters. I'm trying to draw with a mouse. I think I'm doing pretty good. All right, so they're in a cavity that's 80 liters, already twice as big as they want it to be. And it is full of comb. Now here's the weird thing. Notice that I drew the comb in the tree like this. But that is not how we do it. We put our combs in like this. So when the air comes in, it can whip right up through them. No one has tested this. Actually, I have tested this. In the colonies that I keep in a natural way, I drill the hole in the side so it's more like a natural nesting hive. But that's not what we're talking about. All right, so we got them in a hive. We give them frames, and we all know the same old song and dance. They put their babies in the middle. And then, just like in the wild setting, they put the honey on the outside. I'm not going to draw 10 frames because, we don't have time. But we all get the gist because we're all beekeepers and we know what's going on. Okay, so they just did what they would normally do, right? Because a good beekeeper is simply taking advantage of what the colony is already doing. Okay, so, and we got this huge entrance. I forgot to tell y'all that they will reduce the size of their entrance to 1 inch and 1/4. Wait, 1/4, sorry. That is a tiny hole in diameter. So they'll reduce the entrance to 1 inch and 1/4. The Langstroth entrance is massive compared to that. I mean, absolutely massive. Which allows more cold air in. Okay, so far, we're very similar to natural nesting situation, except for we have this huge entrance. And our insulation on the walls, as we already know, is 0.75. Not good. So we have a cluster. And wintertime rolls around, they form a cluster. We already know heat radiates out from all sides. You notice that these lines go through the hive, right? Because we are losing heat because our side walls are not insulated. Remember, in a natural nesting situation, that heat bounced back because of insulation. But we have the potential, I should say, to lose our heat to the outside. Not much. Only about 25% of heat is lost through the side and bottom. So not much, so that's not so bad. Because remember, our honey's there, it helps. But if any heat actually makes it to this sidewall, it's going to leak right back out to the outside. Our biggest problem is the top. 75% of heat is lost through the top. Because remember that density thing we talked about? Heat is lighter, hot air is lighter than cold air, so hot air moves up. And it just goes right out. Because the top of a Langstroth hive is not any better insulated than the sides. So now we got a problem. Remember in our natural nesting colony, they were living in a heat envelope. That heat envelope prevented the buildup of cold air. Well, we've lost that. Now look what happens. That means this cluster has to work really, really, really hard, way harder than a naturally nesting colony has to work to fight the heat. Because they are not living in a heat envelope, they're living in a cold envelope. Now, many beekeepers are scared of that water, and so they want to vent it out. And so they help the bees by making a vent hole right here. A vent hole allows cold air to enter. Remember, that makes the dew point right here. Remember what dew point means? That's the point at which hot air will let go of its water, and it will drip water right on top of your cluster. Not good. So, if you take nothing else, and I mean nothing else from this talk, if you disagree with everything else I said and think I'm wrong, please, if nothing else, insulate the top. Put you a 1 to 2 inch insulation board up here, if you do nothing else, to stop that 75% heat loss. And then trust your honey frames to keep your side insulated. And that, my friends, is the end of my talk. Now I am excited to discuss all of this biology and ecology with you and answer all of your questions. Now, as I understand it, your questions have been, for my convenience, shunted into the Q&A, and there's some in the chat. So I will start with the Q&A, and we'll answer those questions. And then if we answer everything in Q&A, we'll jump over to the chat and answer some of those questions. But Q&A has the priority, because, it makes sense, right? Hi, Scott. I'll read the question, then I'll answer it, okay? So it says, hi, Scott. Being at the North California coast, not temperature, but very high, moist, high winds in winter are the leading cause of my colony deaths. I assume due to the higher heat conduction of moist air. Is there literature on the influence of cold moisture on bee mortality? You will not going to find anything that directly looks at if I dump water on a cluster of bees, do they die faster? You'll find a lot of research suggesting that, high moisture gradients above the colony are detrimental, whereas moisture gradients below the colony are not. This goes way back to 1965 even. I can't remember his name, but I make the paper available to my students in the apprentice course. But way back in 1965, they realized very quickly that without beekeeper intervention, most of the water occurred below the cluster. With beekeeper intervention, way back in 65, they'd put like a 3-inch empty box on top and fill that with shavings. And those shavings would collect all the water, freeze into a block, or drip onto the cluster, and that was killing the colony. So you won't get a direct answer to your questions from the literature. We have to take what they found in the literature and apply it to our situation. Now, we have what they call, there's no way y'all will know this, but we have what they call Hellgate winds, because Missoula is at the mouth of a valley. So the Hellgate winds whip through here. So I know what you're talking about when it comes to high winds. Our winds are very, very dry, so I don't know about the moisture. Our winds are very dry. So it becomes paramount for us to reduce the entrance. You've got to reduce the entrance. And, once they stop flying, you can even turn the colony so they're not facing prevailing winds. That will help tremendously. And I'm sure it goes without saying, because I'm speaking to a bunch of people who are members of the Western Apicultural Society, you can't have an open screen bottom board in our environment. It's just too cold. So you seal up that bottom board. So if you're using a screen bottom board, just make sure that you close it off. I even stick an insulation board, because there's a little gap between the screen and the bottom. I slip an insulation board in there so the bottom's highly insulated. I reduce the entrance to 1.25 inches, just like they would in a natural setting. And then I make sure the entrance is not oriented toward the prevailing winds, and that seems to do good for me. Don't worry about the moisture; they'll take care of it. They want it, and if you have that temperature gradient, you keep that cold air at the bottom, because it has to stay at the bottom because it's denser and heavier, so gravity pulls it down. If you keep that moisture gradient by having well insulated top at the very least, but if you have good insulated sides as well, you'll keep that the temperature gradient that will keep that cold, wet air below them. Great question. All right, let me see. Oh, they're really rolling in now. I don't know if I can keep up, especially with long answers like that. But y'all gonna find I'm a long answer guy. All right, so it looks like when you post a new question, it goes to the top. So I should start at the bottom and work up. Okay, here we go. I'm starting at the bottom and work up. I have replaced my Langstroth hive with horizontal hives. My strong hive absconded in October. That's too bad. Do you have opinions about horizontal hives? I like horizontal hives. They're neat, right? Because you get to see how the colony makes its own comb if left to their own devices. However, I find that it's difficult to insulate, and that's my big hurdle, my big thing against horizontal hives. Horizontal hives were made popular in Africa. It's never winter there, and it's because at the time, this is like late 80s, early 90s, Africa, many parts of Africa were still considered a third world country, and they had difficulty making a product that they could sell on the world market. But the Peace Corps quickly realized, hey, honey is an easy product for them to produce that they can sell on the world market and get them out of poverty. And so they looked around, but they didn't have the infrastructure to build box hives. But they had plenty of feeding troughs and plenty of logs that they could split in half. So that was the birth of the horizontal hive. They would hang them in trees, but they did not have to deal with winter. So my biggest gripe against the horizontal hive is, first of all, bees would rather build up than out. And so I don't care for that. And if it gets really long, how can they move to the food way over here? So those are the things that make horizontal hives a challenge in the cold Northwest that we live in. But if you're succeeding in it, actually, it doesn't sound like you are. So just consider that. I'm not telling you to get rid of your horizontal hives. I know how expensive they are. We have one. But they've started to make insulative wraps for horizontal hives. So I would definitely recommend giving that a shot. All right, still working from the bottom. Okay. Actually, now I think it's the top I should work from. Anyway. Okay. I am comparing two hives this winter. That's great. One has had a lot of dead bees out in front, especially after the last deep freeze, negative 18 degrees Fahrenheit. So I think it is a healthy cleansing, but the other has no dead bees out front. Are they okay? Well, it's hard to say. Not without seeing this situation, I am totally guessing, but maybe I can give you some biology to help to guide you. Sometimes some colonies just don't clean the bees out the bottom, and enough of them die to clog the entrance, and maybe that's why the one's not showing a bunch of dead bees. Yeah, a bunch of dead bees coming out to die, that's not unheard of. You can expect to lose 50% of your population over winter. That's just natural die-off. I don't mean 50% of your hives, I mean 50% of your colonies as a whole. I mean 50% of the bees in any particular colony. You can expect that many to die over the winter. So that's not surprising, and you do expect them to kick them out. But some colonies, they can't kick them out because the bottom got clogged. So I'll go around, I'll just pick a corner, and I'll pull out my hive tool, and I will rake out some so they can get out. Okay. We like that chat. Chart, it is in Celsius. Good. All right, let me see here. Where do bees store water produced by them? They don't have to store it. It will condense on the sides of stuff. They can, go down and get it. And like I said, Dr. Seeley found that some hives would even build pools at the bottom to catch it. Now keep in mind, in a well-insulated hive, they don't have to cluster near as much for near as long as in an uninsulated hive. So they're free to move around the hive a whole lot more in an insulated hive. In fact, I was talking to Randy Oliver today. We were discussing thermal siphoning, and he told me, he said, in a well-insulated hive, Scott, he cut a window in a well-insulated hive, and he pulls the window out, and he says, I can see bees all winter long walking around the sidewall. So, and we've known this for decades. Since the 70s, they have theorized that this tight clustering behavior that we see in managed hives that are uninsulated, natural nesting bees just simply don't have to do it. Only when it gets severely cold do they have to cluster so tightly. So they're more free to move about the hive or cavity to access the water. All right. Every time there's a new question, it moves my thing here. So I'm kind of jumping around. I don't mean to do that. Okay, our hives are insulated Our hives have an insulated honey super R22 on top of our hive. Great, your top is insulated. My husband wants the inner cover hole to be open to this with a screen cover to allow airflow. Okay. The condensation can build around. I think the inner cover hole should be covered up to let the condensation build there. What do you say? Oh, you're trying to let me settle something between you and your husband. That's clever. All right. I need more information. So the hive body is R22. I need to know if the top insulation is at least R6 or higher. It doesn't matter if that hole is open or not. If your lid is not insulated, then and again, it still doesn't matter if it's open or not, because that entire lid is cold, and that all the heat they're producing is going to hit it, and then condensation is going to occur. So I like that your super is R22. That's pretty high. But is your top R22? Is your top insulated at all? If your top is insulated, it doesn't matter, because it's going to trap all the hot air. And that's perfect. If it's not insulated, it doesn't matter, because it's not going to be able to stop water from condensing above your cluster. Hope that answered your question. All right, let me see here. I'm curious about recommendations on ventilation and insulation of hives in a cold winter climate, eastern Idaho here. Thinking about water, ice, ventilation to manage moisture and CO2, and not having too much heat loss. I've observed higher losses in my hives that had less ventilation, but there could certainly be other factors. Yeah, again, not enough information. I would steer you towards emulating what naturally nesting bees do. They want a lower entrance with no ventilation. I would recommend that. So if they are in a high, actually, let's talk about this for a minute. Which kind of goes back to the question about the hole in the inner cover. So if you are in extremely cold environment, Montana, Canada, and they're in an insulated cavity, so you're already ahead of the game, and they have an insulated roof. Okay, so let's say they're in an insulated cavity and they have an insulated roof. I don't think it's that big a deal if you have a vent hole. They don't want it. So again, I think you should emulate what they do as best you can. But if you just cannot stand to not have a vent hole of some sort, if the roof is ventilated, it's not going to be that detrimental. Because the thermo-siphoning is pretty much set. And that little hole you make is not going to change it if you have good top insulation. If you don't have good top insulation, then everything I drew on the screen is going to happen. But if you have good top insulation and you just can't go to sleep at night without putting a vent hole, go ahead. It's not going to hijack the thermal conductance and the thermal systems going on inside that hive if it's well insulated. Okay, hope that answered your question. But again, I highly recommend emulating what naturally nesting bees are doing, and naturally nesting bees will seal every entrance except for one small lower bottom one. Okay, my understanding is that dry wood has an R value of 1 per inch. Yeah, well, it depends on the species of tree, but yeah, that's good. Air in the wood pores provide a good bit of that insulation. I'll buy that. But most trees are living, and green wood has a lot of moisture in the wood and thus less air. I'll buy that. I have tried to find R values for green wood with no luck. Do you have any info on that? I haven't looked. Well, when I did my R value research, I looked at trees, living trees, right? And living trees are different than dead trees, as you stated. And living trees have thermal mass, which helps. And so I only looked at live trees because I was very interested in what natural nesting colonies are doing. But then I wanted to compare it to a Langstroth hive. So then I found the R value of a Langstroth hive. I haven't looked beyond that. So the typical Langstroth hive has R value of 0.75. Regardless of whether or not there's water in it or anything like that, on average is 0.75. I don't know what other wood is because I never looked. I just wanted to compare natural to Langstroth, so I just found out what the Langstroth R value is. And the Langstroth R value is published in lots of papers. Let's see what else we got. I have tried to find R values for green wood. No, do you? Okay. My thought is 4 inches of dead wood around a cluster would be much more insulation, R4, than 4 inches of living wood. Yeah, maybe. But we also don't have to put them in a 5-foot blanket. You know what I mean? The sides, remember, only 25% is lost in the sides. So we don't have to worry too much about the sides. I like to have it around 4, somewhere between 4 and 6. That seems to be very successful from everywhere from Montana to Australia. I know an Australian beekeeper, Mr. Croker, and he put his entire operation, he's a commercial beekeeper, he put his entire operation into styrofoam hives. He found that they did better for him. I'm talking about a desert climate. They do better because insulation works both ways. And his R value is around 6, and he liked it so much he invented a company that produces insulated hives called Hive IQs. I have a few, they're great. So if you're looking into stepping up to insulated hives, I recommend those. But you know, any insulated hive will do. So the most important insulation point is the top. So if you can get that high enough and shoot for between 4 and 6 for the sides, you're going to be fine. Any way you can get it. If you're a woodsman and you can carve a hive body out of a 4-inch tree, or well, it had to be more 4 inches. You know, in my naturally nesting course, I make my students devise a way to insulate their hives. And one guy, he's a lumberjack, and he cut down this big old tree, and then he used a chainsaw and he cut a big old square in the middle of it. And he said it working great. So however you get it, it really doesn't matter. As long as you get between 4 and 6 for the sides and more, 25 for the top or more. Hope that answered your question. Okay, should we consider in cold winter for hive frames to be changed from perpendicular to entrance, parallel to entrance? No one has researched that. The only reason I brought it up is because I'm just telling y'all what natural nesting bees do, and natural nesting bees don't build their frames parallel to the hole. They build them perpendicular. So this year I drilled some holes I have some bees I keep in a natural way. I drilled some holes in the side to see if it works, and I'll let you know next time I give a talk next year. But shoot, give it a try. You tell me what you find. We can share our information. So no upper entrance in winter. Correct. Quilt box? No. Quilt box catches moisture. Bad idea. Black tar wrap. You can black tar wrap for sure, but if you're going to black tar wrap, put a piece of insulation on top. I like to, if I'm using if I'm using a pollinator cover, I like to put a piece of insulation down and then put the pollinator cover on top of the insulation and then ratchet strap it down so it's smooth and tight. I'm talking about, 1-2 inch piece of insulation board. Put it on top and then wrap it with the black tar to give the side insulation a little bit of help. And if you can push a bunch of colonies together, they'll take advantage of each other's heat. So let's say you got 5 colonies, they're all sitting on one table. Do the top like I said, put your piece of insulation board up there, push them all together, wrap them all one time. Actually, I got a video I can show y'all, but I don't know how we are on time. You want to see a video? I guess the only people that can answer are the people who run the thing.
Maybe we could go through the questions first, Scott, and then.
Well, we're halfway down the question, so maybe we're gonna get there. If we have the end, I'll show you a video on how to wrap. But it sounds like you already know how. Well, wrapping is fun. It's like a giant Christmas present that you get to open in the spring. All right, where were we? It moved on me again. There we go. All right. Do you have any recommendation for installation around the sides of a single brood box? Yeah, you can get something called hive cozies. They slip over the top. They're built for a 2-story, but you can just cut that off and slip it on there. There's a new one. Well, there's all kinds now. Now this insulation thing is catching on. Just do you a Google search. There's all kinds of options now, from actual hives made out of insulating material to things that are custom cut to wrap around a hive for wintertime. So now this is really catching on. I'm so glad that we're finally getting some momentum on this insulation. So you'll find lots of options. Hi, Dr. Debnam. My colonies are in zone 5-5A, about 10 degrees here. Hey, me too. Do you recommend solid bottom boards then to capture water? Yes, absolutely. Well, not necessarily to capture the water because, like I said, Professor Seeley only found that some of his natural nesting colonies did that. So I don't really worry about helping them catch water at the bottom because if they're in a well-insulated box, like we've already said, they are free to move more. So we don't have to worry about trapping the water, but I like to cover that bottom board with a piece of insulation. So, most bottom boards come with a slide in that you slide in that covers it, so it's not open to the bottom. So I like to slide that slide in and then fill the gap with a piece of styrofoam insulation, just because I want that bottom to be highly insulated. And then of course the top is insulated, and all mine are now in insulated hives. So I used to wrap them with tar like we were talking about to get the sides. Any other change to enhance the bottom board for water storage? Thank you. Yeah, I don't recommend yet. Let's see if some research comes out about this water storage. So let's don't try to help them with the water yet. Let's see what the research finds in the next few years, and then see what if there's anything we can do to modify our hives. I don't think there will be, but the most important thing is if they're in a well-insulated cavity, they don't have to cluster as tightly nor for as long, and they're free to move around and get the water from the side walls or wherever it happens to form. All right, where we go here. What is the smallest entrance size or height that can be used to prevent mouse entrances? All right, if you reduce it to 1.25 inches, that's not going to be enough because mice can fit into something small like that. But if you drive a nail or a screw in the middle of that 1.25 inch hole, mouse won't be able to get in. But you can also just buy mouse guards. They sell them in all the bee stores, and mouse guards work great. All right, Scott, I experimented with a condensing hive last winter, no upper entrance or vent top insulation, 1-inch foam and reflectix, candy board and 3-inch lower opening. I had good survival, yes, but lots of mold issues. Oh, that's too bad. Other hives had a 1/2-inch hole, but otherwise were treated the same. This year, I went to 1.5-inch top insulation and one small hole. This seems to be best to avoid mold issues. I like it. No question there, just sharing your experiences. This is fantastic. I will remember this and tell others. Thank you for posting that. Lee, maybe. Hey, your name is Maybe. That's great. Yeah, I'm so glad to hear this. But let's don't worry about mold, right? People think, okay, they open up their hive in the spring and their bees are dead and molding. They think the mold killed the bees. No. You know what the #1 decomposer is on planet Earth? Mold. Mold is everywhere all the time. All the mold that people think killed their hives, their colonies, was there all year round. It's just when the bees died, the mold was able to grow off their dead bodies. Mold does not kill bees in and of itself. But that's not what you're asking about anyway. That's just a side note. I'm glad to hear this experience. I will start sharing this with my students and others who will listen to me. Do you think there are any value to Klaus Hive Dome? I don't know what that is. I can Google it, but I don't know if we have time. Send me an email and we can talk about it. I don't mind the dome tops as long as it's filled insulation. So I don't know what a Klaus hive is, so I can't talk intelligent about it, so I apologize. Should we consider an extra hole in Langstroth foundation to enable bees to move from frame to frame during cluster? You can try it, but they're just going to seal it. You'll notice that many of the wax foundations you buy have a hole in the corner, or they have it's perforated so you can break the corner off. That is what that's for. If you try to put a hole in the dead center of a frame, they'll just seal it up with wax because they're awesome. But again, I'm starting to sound like a broken record. If they're in a well-insulated cavity, they don't need to cluster as tightly and they can move more freely. But good question. Hi, Dr. Scott. Ken here from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Living here, we had +4 degrees C and 2 days later -35 degrees C. What do you recommend for insulation? Ooh, I don't know if you know Etienne. He lives in your area and he's doing a lot of research on the best insulation for your area. But he uses 1.5-inch insulated boards when they're not in actual insulated hives. So just buy these 1.5 insulation boards, custom cut it, and duct tape or ratchet strap it around, and do the same for the top. Seal it real good. That should do. I have sealed hives I have a sealed hive and only have a small bottom entrance. Great. R20 sides and R60 top. Shoo, you got it all figured out. Why are you asking me? This is my first winter with this setup. I will be surprised if things don't turn out good for you. So yeah, don't ask me. You got it all figured out. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? If you open up that hive and they're all dead, send me an email and we'll talk about it. But I do not think that's going to be the case. You are doing everything right, my friend. Does it matter if insulation is under, over cover, or on top or of undercover? They will chew on the insulation at some point if you don't get it off when spring rolls around. So I like to put it as close to the top of the frames as possible. I just feel squirrely throwing it on top of a lid. So if you have an inner cover, put the inner cover down and then cut your insulation to fit the inner cover as tightly as you possibly can, and then put your telescoping lid on and then ratchet strap it down to squeeze it tight. That's my best bet. That's what I like best. But I wouldn't have any compulsion against putting an insulation right on top, putting the telescoping lid on top of the insulation. Just know that if you don't get that off or change that setup before spring rolls around, there's a chance they might chew on it. Okay, here in the Central Valley of California, we are having 30-degree Fahrenheit change from day highs to nighttime lows. How do our colonies deal with such a rapid changing temperature, humidity environment, all in insulation? Okay, remember, insulation works both ways. It helps you retain heat and helps you to keep it cold if it needs to be. So insulation works both ways. Like I told you, Mr. Croker, who lives in desert in Australia, his insulated hives make 30 pounds more honey in a desert. And also there's some research out of Israel, which is also a desert country. They found that insulated hive did better on every metric: build up, brood, nest area size, as well as honey production. So insulation works both ways. So those wild temperature changes you're experiencing, if they're experiencing it in an insulated cavity or hive, it's not as wild to them, because of the insulative properties that you're affording them. And also, remember I told you that honey is a good thermal mass? So that's a buffer, right? As the walls change temperature quickly, the thermal mass of the honey can buffer some of that change also. And also recall that the European honeybee is the most widely distributed insect on planet Earth. She can survive in any environment. Well, I should say any. She can survive everywhere we've taken her so far. And so you're not the only hive in the world that's experiencing these wide temperature changes. It's happening all over, or in other places in the world, and there are bees there. So they have the inborn behavioral mechanism to manage that if they're in a well-insulated cavity. Sounds like yours are. Actually, you didn't say either way. If they're not in a well-insulated cavity, they are going to have to struggle because you've got no insulation. So when it's super cold, they got to cluster, and it warms up, they'll break cluster and can go get some food and move food around. Super cold, they'll cluster again, try to survive all the food that they moved. When it warms up, they'll move back out, because they do move honey within the hive to where they're going to cluster. Yes, please, video. All right. We're almost at the end of the question, so we can go to the videos. Aren't mites the real issue? Good question, anonymous attendee. For example, research showed that bees overwinter in chicken wire in Canada and Minnesota, in Wisconsin and Minnesota. Research, here's the fun thing about that. Research has shown that if you take 40 kilograms, I got to use the metric system here because that's what the research used. You take 40 kilograms of bees, give them 20 kilogram colony, give them 40 kilograms of honey, put them in a freezer at negative 80 degrees Fahrenheit. They can survive for a month. Bees are amazing. Unfortunately, they ate all of their honey to survive that incredible condition. Believe it or not, honey consumption is not the highest in the winter. Honey consumption is the highest in the spring. So your colonies are more likely to starve to death in the spring than in the winter. Winter, they eat about 4 pounds a month. That's it. Spring comes, that jumps up to 11, 15 pounds a month. Because they got to raise the brood, they got to heat the temperature much to 93.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's a lot going on. I don't know if you can just take a chicken wire bundle of bees, stick it outside, that 100% of your colonies, or at least even an impressive amount of your colonies, would survive. What's killing them is, well, there's a lot of things, but insulation helps. Mimicking what they do naturally helps. There are honeybee species that do live in exposed nests, but they live in warm tropical environments, not in temperate zones. But yes, absolutely, monitor and control your varroa mites, please. Good point. I have a horizontal hive made up of 2x12s. I use Langstroth frames in it. It holds 30 frames. I place a brick in front of the entrance, leaving only 1 inch opening. Great. I close the vent in the roof in the wintertime. Fantastic. I don't have a vent in the boards covering the frames. Nice. This is my second winter with 1 hive and the first winter with the second hive. I found your talk very interesting. We'll do a few things differently next winter. Nice. I love to hear success stories. Oh, this is the last question. Anonymous attendee, yet again, does so much insulation slow up spring activity since insulation works both ways, keeping heat of spring out of the hive? No. What makes the colony ramp up for spring is day length, and that is further mediated by temperature, right? So you're thinking, well, the insulation will affect their ability to detect temperature, right? Wrong, because this is a living organism with a 3-mile range. They'll just step out and sample the temperature, and then that triggers everything. So day length, believe it or not, they'll start making their brood after the winter solstice. In most temperate areas. That's not the case in Canada, by the way. But even there are some Canadian colonies that started to make tiny brood patches after the winter solstice. And that's simply because day length changed and triggered her to start laying. How in the world did they determine day length when they're sealed inside of a hive? Same way they determine spring has arrived and they should start ramping up. So, and remember when I told you, and I'm sure I answered this after you wrote your question, remember the Israelis found that every metric was better in insulated hive, including spring buildup. Okay, that is all the questions in the Q&A.
Hey,
Scott,
Scott,
you did miss 2. Anonymous had, when are winter bees raised?
Ooh, that's a great question. All right, winter bees are made in the temperate zones somewhere around October, mid-October. No, sorry, mid-September to mid-October. That's when they make their winter bees. So it's pretty late in the season. And it takes about a month to make all that they're going to make. But that can shift depending on, I'm just using temperate zones, so that just shifts depending on where you are in the world. Do they make winter bees at all in Florida, for example? So in temperate zones like we are, because I'm speaking to the Western Apicultural Society, so you all feel my pain, we can expect our winter bees to be being made mid-October to mid-November. And some things like Queen State can alter that, move that one way or the other, but for the most part, it's late in the fall. What's the other ones that I missed?
And the second one was from John. Do drones produce heat also?
That's a great question too, and a fun question, because people always think drones are just losers. They are not. All right, so as I told you on the beginning, I did my research on brood temperature regulation, and guess who I saw helping with brood temperature regulation? That's right, drones. All right, first let me tell you this. Remember I told you that the overall temperature of a brood nest is 34.5 degrees Fahrenheit. However, the individual brood themselves are much warmer, around 36, depending on the stage of brood. And who keeps these individual broods warm are heater bees. So heater bees heat individual cells, or sometimes they can heat up to 6 cells if they can get into an empty cell, and they can heat the 6 cells around that empty cell. But heater bees take care of the pinpoint accuracy of individual cells. However, the nurse bees as a whole, when they enter the brood nest area, superheat their thoraxes to around 36 degrees Celsius. Heater bees' thoraxes can be around 42 degrees Celsius on average. I've seen one as high as 47 degrees Celsius, which is 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot to the touch, literally. So heater bees are taking care of each individual cell. Nurse bees are keeping the overall temperature very high. So 34.5 degrees Celsius. Now, if I watch a drone on a thermal camera, his thorax is cool when he's outside the brood nest. When he enters the brood nest, he heats it up. He keeps it heated up while he's in the brood nest, and then when he leaves, he cools back down. So just like his sisters, when he enters the brood nest, he warms his thorax. When he leaves, he cools it back down. So that is anecdotally a suggestion that he is actually helping warm the brood, though he is not actively trying to warm the brood. He's just passing through and is doing his little bit. Drones are much more concerned about what they are designed to do, which is to reproduce. And there's also been some other anecdotal evidence showing that they do sometimes participate in air circulation in the hive. Okay. Was that all
All
of
right.
it?
Now,
Before you
Nelda
go to
has
the
a
video,
question.
may I ask a question?
Certainly.
Okay. There is a new product out on the market. It is called a hive heater. And it's a solar panel that you put on the outside of your hive.
Uh-huh.
And it is claimed to maybe have some effects on overwinter survival. Do you
Uh-huh.
have any thoughts about adding solar panels to the outside of your beehive?
I don't like it.
You don't like it?
Nope.
Tell me more.
Because if you add heat to the system, you don't know what you're doing. Because remember, they have to work to make the heat that they want, where they want it. So I don't know. I just don't like it. Without seeing it, I really can't say much more about it. My gut says no. But my gut says no mainly because I trust bees to do their thing. And I tell my students this all the time. You are not solely responsible for them surviving the winter. They bear some of that responsibility also. If we've given them a good cavity and make sure they're healthy enough to store the food to survive the winter, we don't need to do these what I call heroic efforts. And adding a heater to a colony would definitely be heroic efforts. I personally think that insulation, reducing the entrance, mimicking what natural nesting colonies do is the way to go. However, having said all of that, I haven't seen this product, so I wouldn't want to tear somebody's product down without, it's just unfair for me to do that. Just my gut says, even if it worked, I wouldn't be interested in doing it, but that's based on my goals and values. I don't want to impose my goals and values on anyone else. So if your goal is to, try and have fun with every new gadget, then please do it. Don't do it because Scott said you shouldn't. No, make all your decisions based on the biology and your goals and values. So yeah, sorry I can't give you a better answer than that. Just my gut says no, it's simply because much of that is based on my goals and values without seeing the product. But I would be suspicious. This is not the first time someone has tried to help colonies by heating them, and it has never worked yet. But again, have not seen the product, do not want to tear a product down that I have not seen. Okay, y'all want to watch a video?
Yeah, so let's watch a video, Scott.
All right, it'll take me a minute to pull it up, but not too terribly long. I'm gonna go to my, this is a free advertising for me, because I'm gonna show y'all the University of Montana course. Maybe talk some of y'all into taking it. All right, let me share screen. Boom. Okay, let me log in. And our queen rearing course is starting next week, and I believe there are still spots available. Even if you're not a commercial beekeeper or don't want to be, this is a detailed look into honeybee reproductive strategies, reproductive biologies, queen biology. It is just interesting. I think I highly recommend it. Of course I would. But people get scared because they see it as commercial. No, there's so much good stuff in here. Even if you're just a sideline or interested in queen rearing, I highly recommend taking the course. It is great. But that's not what we're coming here to see. We came here to see
Well, I took it, Scott, and it changed everything about how I raise queens.
Nice.
Yeah, so I would highly recommend it as well.
Yeah, it's currently it's my favorite class to teach. All right, where are we at? We need to go to Colony Dynamics. Let's open that bad boy up. Year in the apiary. Yeah, it's just year in the apiary. Somewhere I wrap a hive and I show you a video. These are just lectures for the various. There it is, wrapping a hive. All right, so here we go. I'm gonna start this thing. I'm gonna let it play for a few minutes to make sure the sound's coming through. If y'all give me the thumbs up for the sound, then I'll let it play and I'll shut up. Okay, so I'm gonna start it.
So it's winter in
Y'all hear that good? All right, I'm gonna let it play and I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna make it big too.
Montana, so we'll show you how we wrap our hives in preparation for winter. What we're going to do is show you how to wrap single hives and how to wrap multiple hives. To wrap your hives for winter, you'll need three things: 30-pound roofing felt, a utility knife, and a staple gun with staples. You can use 15-pound roofing felt, however I find that it tears easily, so the 30-pound is much easier to work with. The first thing you want to do is roll out your roofing felt so that it will totally surround your hives. And then you cut pretty center out. Take a whole.
I told you I let it play, but I just saw something I want to show y'all. Okay, you see this little wood shim? That's where I
Yeah.
put my insulation. See this wood shim here too. So what I did, I just took a whole hive bite and I just cut it inch and a half, made several of these little shims and I put my insulation there. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Sorry.
On the
So you put it inside of that, Scott?
Yeah.
and go from that same cut to the outer edge. And now that you have your felt cut, the rest is easier than wrapping a Christmas present. All you have to do is make the felt lining up to the top of your bottom boards. Put the staple in to hold it. And secure it. Next, you just walk around the hive, taking the felt with you. Making sure to leave the entrance open. Then you secure it. Now, if you have a contractor's lid made out of wood, you can staple also the felt to the top. But if you have a telescoping lid that has a metal flashing the roof, you just need a weight to hold the felt down. Next thing you do, you make 4 cuts from the inside to the top. Reach down, pull up. Reach down to the top of the colony, pull it up. One more time. This creates the flaps you will be folding to cover the top. You just fold those flaps in. Then just place a weight on the center of your flaps. Now you always want to make sure that you open the entrance so they can come and go as they need to. And if you recall, our entrance is right here in this corner, so all we have to do is cut out a little piece, them, come and go. And to make sure that it doesn't shift over the winter, I like to staple right over the entrance. All right, so we're back at the Fort Missoula apiary. Now we're going to show you how to wrap multiple hives. All we're going to do is push these 3 hives together and wrap them just like we wrap the single hives. But we'll show you right now. And there you have it. That's how you wrap multiple hives. If you have any questions, just post them in the forums.
Boom. That was a tar that the gentleman asked about. That's how we do it. All right. Anything else? Let me see. 2 new questions in the chat.
Can you remind me what weight of felt that was?
That's 30. Felt comes in 30 and 15 pound. You can use 15 pound, but it tears so much easier to work with the 30. All right, let's see if I can find the 2 new questions. They kind of get lost. Thoughts on commercial beekeeping placing hives in an environmental controlled space? Oh, I dig it if it's done right. But it's not as easy as you just stick them in the shed. You have to be able to do three things if you're going to overwinter inside. You have to be able to control the light. It has to be black or red light so the bees do not want to leave. You have to be able to control the temperatures. You keep it around 41 degrees so they don't want to break cluster. And you need to be able to flush out the CO2 because they produce a lot of CO2, and they can even produce their own heat and heat the room. So you need to be able to flush out. You need to have fans built in that flush out at certain temperatures. And so it sounds easy, but it's not easy. But I am a big fan of it. It definitely works. Instead of staple, I use 2 straps. Yeah, straps is totally fine. What do you think? I got no problem with straps. Shoot, you can even try some of the tape they've invented nowadays can stand up through a winter. So yeah, I mean, it's fine. I would like to find something. Well, now I got everything in styrofoam, so I don't have to wrap anymore. But yeah, when you staple them, spring rolls around, you got all these staples stuck inside your hive. That ain't no fun to remove all those. So yeah, straps is a good idea. Anonymous attendee, I like your name. What's the purpose of the little corner you cut out in the roofing felt in the front of the video? It looked like that was above the entrance. It was. But just in case a student wrapped it and closed the entrance, I wanted to illustrate what to do. So a good eye, Terrence McKay. Do you worry about the solar heat gain from the black tar? No, I am depending on it. I live in altitude and black tar paper gets super hot. So look, it may not be a good idea for you. I'm not saying everyone should do this. It's just another option. A cheap way to wrap a whole bunch of hives. You definitely, it may not work for you at all because of your high altitude. This is the best presentation I've seen in my 10 years of beekeeping. Yay! Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so glad to hear that. That's all the questions, right? I'll check the chat. I'll talk all night, so y'all need to stop me. I was in Nashville today. It was 7 degrees Fahrenheit. That's pretty cold for Nashville. Actually, Nashville does get pretty good winters. I don't hear anyone. Is this okay? Greetings to everyone. If you have questions, drop them. Okay, feel free to start at your convenience. Greetings, everyone. If you get, oh, good. There's no real questions here. You're just pushing everybody towards. Oh, good. All right. So that was the chat. And chat had nothing that I needed to answer. Okay. Oh, one more question. Yeah, this was excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed talking to y'all. Okay.
Well, Scott, thank you. This was fantastic.
Oh yeah, it was fun. Thank you all.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
And good to be back in your classroom again.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Yeah.
Yeah. So just some housekeeping stuff. So this video presentation tonight will be posted on the website by Monday. So you can go to the WAS webpage and it'll be posted there, and Kurt said by Monday. Also, and you may find this interesting too, Scott, is that next month we have Marla Spivak.
Oh, I like her.
Yeah, she's going to talk about propolis in the hive.
Yeah, she's fantastic. I love that talk.
Yeah, she is. So her presentation will start at 5:30 rather than 7 or 7:30, which is our normal time. So just any of you on this call tonight, be aware that it's a little different time than normal. She told me, she says, look, I'm retired. I go to bed early. I don't want to be starting at 7:30. So it's important enough to listen to her that we wanted to change the time. So Scott, you're a good man. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And y'all, I have to tag on to that. She is fantastic. She led the way for African eyes. She led that research on that. She led the research on propolis. Man, y'all are you hit the jackpot getting her.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Scott.
And I will see y'all. Please have me back again. I'll see y'all next time.
All right. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.